Hey, welcome back. This is Shah. It's been a long time since I've done a dedicated video. I've been focusing on live streams lately and haven't really sat down to do one of these, but I found a thread on the conspiracy subreddit that talks about our friends over at the Whatever podcast, and I thought it'd be interesting to share with you guys. And, again, it's from the conspiracy subreddit, but I do like following it because I at least find conspiracies to be quite entertaining. And I think the further time goes on, sometimes some of the conspiracies can end up being true. Anyways, let's see if there's any truth to this conspiracy. The Whatever podcast gives me deep state, fed glowy vibes. I don't know what glowy is. They have the clean handle at Whatever on every platform: YouTube, Facebook, Insta, X, TikTok, etc. Most huge influencers don't even have that. They have connections on every platform. Thoughts? Do you know how hard it is to get a universally clean one-word handle on every social media platform? Look around at some of your favorite creators and see if they have the same handle on every platform. Odds are they don't. Pokimane is the biggest woman live streamer in the world, and even she can't get Pokimane on Instagram, having to settle for Pokimane LOL. I remember when Mr. Beast had to go by Mr. Beast 6000 on some platforms. This has changed now because he's literally the biggest media creator in the world, but that's the level it takes to get a clean handle across all platforms. This is why I believe the Whatever podcast is some kind of deep state or glowy undertaking. They've had the clean handle Whatever on every platform going back for years. This implies having someone willing to work with you on every social media platform, Meta, X, Google, etc., which is virtually impossible. Most huge creators do not have an inside person on every platform. Heck, not even Donald Trump has the clean Donald Trump on most platforms, having to settle for real Donald Trump on Twitter X. And before you say, well, they might have offered to buy the handle, the vast majority of times the people with old handles from social media accounts made in 2007 or 2009 don't respond, or no longer have access to even be able to sell the accounts in the first place. So I don't think that's what happened with Whatever. Anyways, what are your thoughts? I think that's a pretty interesting conspiracy. I guess my first thought on it would be, well, they probably just paid off the people with the names. I mean, they make pretty good money. It's a big podcast, and I don't think that'd be impossible. But this guy kind of points out some good things, saying, a lot of older accounts might not have access to it. Whatever. I can imagine someone making a username that says Whatever way back when like Facebook was new or Instagram was new. And even myself as a creator, I have a hard time getting my own names. I often have to settle for like this is Shah underscore or this is Shah 100, because even for a name like mine that you think wouldn't be very popular, people have already taken it. So it is kind of interesting that he's managed to do that. But, just this idea of conspiracy and Whatever podcast kind of has me thinking a little bit, because I'm someone who follows like the manosphere stuff. I followed like the red pill and for a while, and I've seen them arguing with feminists, progressives, and more recently arguing with tradcons and the tradcon sort of schism of the fall of 2023. And what I've noticed is that there's been a lot of demonetizations in the space. So it's like Fresh and Fit's demonetized. Just Pearly Things is demonetized. I think Access Vegas just got demonetized, and they didn't have like as many subs as some of these other platforms I just listed. And it's kind of weird that they got demonetized. I didn't think they were doing anything particularly controversial on that show. But I list those three particularly because they have a similar format to Whatever podcast. So now Whatever podcast is kind of the last one standing and has monetization still enabled on it. And you got to think like, that's a little weird. That could indicate, I mean, beyond this whole username conspiracy, that could indicate that maybe Brian has some connections. Here's another comment from the thread. Could potentially be on board with this theory, but my next question is, what purpose do they serve if they are? Every time I've watched this podcast, it's just 1 to 3 guys asking a table of women a bunch of questions, half the women are ridiculous or almost intentionally overly trashy, while at least 1 to 2 of them is always wholesome, modest, deeply religious. So that would be like your Tradcon women. And, Brian does platform a lot of Tradcons, which is something I've noticed. But anyways, the conversation and questions are almost always the same. And after a while, it feels like it's designed to put already compromised women in a situation where they are set up to get called out and made to look stupid, while the rest of the panel expresses their opinions on one girl or argues about men and women's issues. They never really accomplish much of a point beyond bashing girls they bring on with clear intent to humiliate or blast. While pretending to have the moral high ground, to this day, I don't fully understand what the goal is. I actually think that's an interesting question. And one of the things that it calls to mind is, I remember when the Tradcon red pillar split was like really occurring. We had like the Matt Walsh video, we had the Ben Shapiro video, and then we had this kind of back and forth sniping on Twitter between Pearl and there was Sovereign Bra, who's Chase, and who's ironically on the Whatever podcast a lot. So he's not a co-host, but he's on Whatever podcast a lot. He might as well be like a regular contributor. And also with Myron Gaines from Fresh and Fit. So they were going back and forth with Chase and a lot of other Tradcons, Matt Walsh and a lot of the Daily Wire folks, basically. And Brian was just suspiciously quiet the whole time. Like, he didn't say anything. Which to me is interesting, because that leads me to think, like, what is Brian really advocating for? Ostensibly, it's men's rights and the trouble in dating and stuff like that. But at the same time, I also think it's not very clear what he's advocating for. I would actually love to see Brian maybe do an interview about what got him in the space, or what it is he's trying to do for men specifically, maybe on another platform. Like, if he went on a different platform and they're like, what do you believe in, Brian? What are you advocating for? I just think that would be interesting to see. I can't stand these pompous assholes. Their whole moral condemnation stick is boring. In one episode, he schooled this chick about how men build everything in the world, and I was just thinking, like, dude, you form half-baked opinions on a podcast. You aren't even meeting your own criteria for the male specimen. They should call it Strawman Podcast, since they never have guests on who can debate. Now, I mean, to be fair to Brian, I mean, he's had good debaters on there. I think he's had Destiny on, and I'm sure he's had other kind of higher level debaters. So every now and then they will host a debate, but usually when they have those debates, like, I think when he brought him on, it was like kind of a debate with him against like an abortion person. And I think they had him on another time on the show with his then wife, and it's mostly just like Destiny against Tradcons. And that's kind of stuff we've seen. I mean, that is the same conversation we've seen, the sort of conservative versus liberal debate about abortion or family or traditional relationships or whatever. So, but when I look at that, I wouldn't consider that Brian advocating for anything. It's more so him just kind of hosting a sort of boxing match between, these heavyweights that we've seen plenty of, right? So we've seen that fight before. I think this comment's interesting. Daily Wire owns them. That's why Ben reacts to their clips, and Candace was on the show. Now, that's something that I actually find interesting, because I think the real conspiracy is probably more something centered around that. Specifically, that Whatever podcast is more so a front for Tradcons to kind of make inroads into the manosphere red pillar space. I think they see that red pill content, manosphere content is getting a lot of attention from men. A lot of men agree with a lot of the points put forward there, and the Whatever podcast almost seems to be serving this purpose of trying to infiltrate the manosphere and sort of reintroduce Tradcons as someone that really are taking on feminists. When, if you watch my channel long enough, you would know, or know my views that I don't think that's the case. Frankly, I think they enable feminism. Here's a tweet from Rollo Tomasi. He was the co-host of Access Vegas, which was recently demonetized, but this was back in December 22nd of 2023. So this is right when the schism between the Tradcons and red pillars are occurring. And he says, Tradcon hacks who've been on whatever podcast: Lila Grace Rose, Real Candace Owens, Michael J. Knowles, Amala Ekpanobi, the Officer Tatum. Watch more than 20 seconds before you start white knighting, brah. And I just find that interesting because it's like there has been a lot of Tradcons on the show. I mean, we've had Candace Owens, Michael Knowles, Officer Tatum, Lauren Chen, Rollo mentioned Amala, Chase, who's kind of holds the banner, I'd say, the most for the Tradcons, at least more recently. So it's a lot of Tradcons, and this brings me back to my question of what Brian is advocating for, and if it's like you're advocating for something, I get that this is big business right here. I mean, these shows are big business. They bring in a lot of money. Fresh and Fit, Pearl, it's big money, so it's like they don't want to get demonetized. I get it. But at the same time, it doesn't appear that he's advocating for anything because he keeps platforming Tradcons who are advocating for, the same old kind of blue pill talking points of basically getting married, buying into the system, with no real efforts to change the laws or do anything like that. And, a lot of red pill guys are sort of tired of the Tradcon talking points at this point. So then as you see a guy like Brian, who's supposedly advocating for red pill stuff, men's rights stuff, but then it's just like continued Tradcon platforming. Let's take a look at Brian's response to the Fresh and Fit kind of diss against him. I actually made a video on that before, but let's look at his response because I think it shows some of his views on being called someone who's just looking for money.
Get off your high horse, okay? This cope about he's just in it for the money. I mean, my dudes, you guys charge a lot of money for some of the products you sell. The thing is that they bill themselves. I don't bill myself as a dating coach, a guru, or an expert. I'm just a normal guy. And I talk about dating and relationships. I will never bill myself as an expert or a guru or a coach. I'm not going to do landing page funnels and charge you guys $500 to buy some product. Again, I don't have that. I have no issue with them doing that. But if you're going to get on your podcast when I've had nothing but nice things to say about you and essentially attack me, the insinuation that you're making with Fresh shaking his head like, bro, this guy's in it for them. Actually, should we?
Anyways, then he goes on to bring up Fresh's IG and, just it's like Fresh with a bunch of Lambos and stuff like that. Whatever. I get it. Yeah. Like he's basically saying, listen, you're saying I'm in it for the money. You guys are in it for the money too. Whatever. I mean, like I can at least say with Fresh and Fit, like to be generous to them is that they're more so pushing self-improvement, red pill talking points. Myron did write a book, Why Women Deserve Less. They seem more concerned about self-improvement. Whether or not I agree with that or not as the answer, I'm generally advocating more so for changing the laws. I kind of have an axe to grind with the child support system and family law and all these kinds of things. If you watch me long enough, then you know that about me. But when it comes to Brian, you don't see any of the sort of extracurricular stuff there. It's just like, hey, let's platform these people. Let's watch them duke it out. And then when you see the people that he's platforming, at least more so that speak against the sort of feminist imperative, it's mostly Tradcons. I mean, I think he has had some red pillars on there. He's had like Rollo on there and stuff, but I think the show still mostly centers around Tradcons. And the reason I believe that, and that there could be some type of link between the Tradcons and whatever podcast, is because when I look at Daily Wire for some reason always reacts specifically to like whatever podcast clips, which only gives him more exposure. And I don't know if they have like some contract in the back. Probably not. Maybe it's just a good business working relationship. But it's like, I think like Matt Walsh, Ben Shapiro, Michael Knowles, Andrew Clavin, probably all of them have reacted like on their shows. I could be wrong about Andrew Clavin, to specifically whatever podcast clips. And that's fine. But then you specifically see that, Candace Owens was on the show when she was on Daily Wire. Michael Knowles has been there for, I think, a few shows now. And it's just like Tradcon after Tradcon after Tradcon. So it's like, okay, if you're supposedly advocating for men's rights under the understanding that we're in a gynocentric society, both liberal progressives support a kind of gynocentric family law system. Tradcons themselves seem to support that and keep advocating for men to kind of shoot themselves in the foot by participating in it. Then you start to ask questions. One thing, that I noticed that really kind of elucidated this and might even point to Brian sort of being in it for the money. Hey, which is fine, make money. And hell, if everybody else is demonetized, he's probably feeling pressure like this could be next. Unless, of course, he is in league with these people and they view him as safe. But when the debates between the Tradcons and red pillars were being negotiated, this is in the fall of 2023, Brian finally decided to say something. Like, he was quiet the whole time. What we saw was Myron Gaines put out a challenge. He listed Sovereign Bra, which is Chase, a big contributor to the Whatever podcast. Lila Rose, also been on the Whatever podcast. Sydney Watson, I don't know if she's been on there. Michael Knowles, he was on the Whatever podcast. Or any Tradcon from Daily Wire to debate the red pill on the Fresh and Fit pod. I will either stay a neutral host or be in the debate depending on what the opposition prefers. It will be Rollo, the Rational Male, Jay Waller. He's actually been on Whatever podcast, and there was a funny clip of Lila Grace. He was on there with Lila Grace, and there was this weird interaction between them. Michael Sartain, the other co-host of Access Vegas, and Paleo ChristCon, who's Andrew Wilson. I don't think he's a red pillar. I would kind of classify him as more so a hardcore Tradcon, like that actually is advocating for more so a patriarchy, and not what we have now. So he's interesting because he's not a red pillar, but he calls out probably lukewarm Christians who fancy themselves as Tradcons, right? Let's put the two ideas to the test through debate. Don't back out now. So Myron challenges them. And, after all this back and forth between Pearl, Myron, Chase, the Daily Wire people, then finally Brian appeared on the scene, and this is what he had to say. I've been pitching this to everyone for over a week behind the scenes. Whatever can serve as a far more neutral platform for this debate to occur. You're far less neutral, and if you participate in the debate, it's even less neutral to host it on your platform. Whatever will host, moderate, and we are prepared to offer the following. Co-production. We host the debate on YouTube. FNF has exclusive simulcast on Rumble. 40-40 split of the revenue generated from fan funding plus 30-day YouTube-based ad revenue, with the remaining 20% split to each participant equally. For purposes of clarity, you keep 100% of whatever you generate from the Rumble simulcast. DM me, let's make it happen. Brian had like no dog in the fight until some kind of big money thing was being negotiated for, right? And it did kind of come off very like weird, at least to me. I'm like, It was kind of a little sad or disappointing that like this whole debate that was supposed to happen got derailed because, it seemed like Brian was going for a bit of the money grab instead of all this. And he kind of gave the Tradcons an out, and we never really got that debate. What we got are just like these series of like sort of debate, but not the ones we had. I think Rich Cooper had Chase on his show. That was interesting. Pearl ended up having a discussion with Michael Knowles. I think Rollo went on Timcast with some folks. We never really got to see Fresh and Chase have the discussion, and they were like the main players in this sort of Twitter discussion. And we never seen, I think James Sexton went on Matt Walsh's show. I reacted to that. There really wasn't much that came out of that, frankly. But anyways, then Myron responded and says, it makes zero sense to involve you when we have a bigger audience, superior equipment, production and staff to properly do this. Also, you're not a good moderator. The debate will be in Miami, or it won't happen, period. We don't need whatever to do this. And then after that, we had Chase respond to that. Now, Brian, I don't know if Brian responded or not, but Chase said it makes perfect sense. You just challenged me publicly to a debate. I gave you terms that work for everyone and that you and your channel will personally profit from. You're the only person not on board. Everyone else is. And if you don't want to support a rival podcast, that's fine. Propose a solution that actually works for everyone. Or are you going to back out of the debate you just proposed? And then, they offered to have Chase, I believe, come in by video or something, because he had said, oh, I got a family member that's sick and I live closer to whatever podcast. But the whole point is that, like, it never happened, and it was just like a big disappointment. So now we're here, it's months later. The debate that we wanted, frankly, didn't happen. And, I'll sometimes tune into whatever podcast. I don't watch it as often lately, but all these other shows are demonetized. The Department of Homeland Security had that list that was circulating around of basically, channels that they're watching. I think MTR was on there, Legion of Men, Fresh and Fit Clips, Pearly Things, and Rational Male, I believe. They had this whole list, and I don't remember seeing whatever podcast on that list. See what I mean? So it's just like they're the only ones that are still monetized. They host a bunch of Tradcons. And, Department of Homeland Security isn't really looking at them sideways. So it's like, it's starting to look a little suspicious. I mean, even now, like, this is the kind of stuff we see posted from whatever clips. Degenerate. Charlie Kirk tries to save OF girl, but she goes full degenerate instead. And, that word degenerate, that is a new Tradcon buzzword, right? This is what Chase came out and said the red pillars were, that they were promoting degeneracy. The Daily Wire really took that word degenerate and ran with it. And, that's what they used to lambast the red pillars. Now, we have a lot of demonetizations. We have this Tradcon red pill split. We have whatever podcast that just kind of continuously platforms Tradcons, even though Brian's supposed to be advocating for men. And we don't really see men's rights advocates on the show. I don't even know if they've really had men's rights advocates on the show. I know Brian's inspired by Tom Likas and folks like that. We've had Mike Sartain, Rollo, Jay Waller, and other sort of, red pillar folks like that. But I would classify those guys, maybe not so much Rollo, but some of the other guys more so as self-improvement gurus that sort of offer that as the answer to the situation that we see now in dating and marriage and family creation, instead of more so advocating about the laws. So to me, I still can't really point to anything and say, hey, Brian is advocating for this. So this is why I say I think it'd be interesting to see an interview with Brian where Brian's not on his own platform, or maybe even Brian makes a video and say, hey, like, this is what I believe in. This is what I'm advocating for. This is what I'm doing to advocate for men. And if not, then, I mean, really, hey, then the accusation of just being in it for the money, which is fine. Listen, if there's money to be made, make the money. But at the same time, then it's not inaccurate to say he's just in it for the money. If the conspiracy is true, like, why would the Tradcons choose Brian? Or if Brian's in it for the money, I can see why Brian would choose to be very friendly with the Tradcons. I mean, they got big audiences, they're big platforms. Daily Wire is a very serious media company, and they can get his show some serious exposure. It's big money. So I know why Brian's doing it, but then it's like, why would the Tradcons choose whatever podcast to be a kind of staging ground for them to make inroads into the red pill space? And, if it's not a conspiracy and they don't have an agreement, frankly, I think they just see Brian as a guy that they can control and manipulate. If I had to criticize Brian on something, I'd say he brings on a lot of Tradcons, but I don't think he does a good job of criticizing Tradcons, of holding their feet to the fire. He kind of just gives them their platform to advocate for what they're advocating for, more so, and to use the metaphor of the boxing promoter, like, hey, let's just get these guys on, let them duke it out. We'll pick up the super chats. It's interesting. Every now and then you'll get a glitch in the matrix. You'll get Officer Tatum asking Brian why he won't get married. I can't remember who else did that. It's possibly Michael Knowles, maybe somebody else. You'll get Lila Rose kind of grilling Justin Waller a bit. But other than that, I mean, Brian tends to avoid that conversation. Or, he'll have the sort of standard conservatives versus someone like Destiny, which we've seen many times on many other channels. And it just leads me to believe that the Tradcons prefer whatever podcast because they can control Brian. They're not going to get a bunch of pushback from Brian. They're kind of little broing him, and he sort of just goes along with it. Chase is on the show, and he just brings people who are, whatever, preaching their religious beliefs or convictions, and that's what it is. So I don't know. It just has me thinking. I mean, I don't know if the username conspiracy is true, but I think maybe this Brian kind of working behind the scenes with the Tradcons is true, and that just makes me want to share. I wanted to share some old threads from the original Red Pill subreddit, which was created after these primordial sort of forums on the corners of the internet, like So Suave or whatever. Eventually, we got the Red Pill subreddit in like 2012, and that's where a lot of this discussion started happening. But this idea of Tradcons being gynocentric as much as like liberal feminists, and being blue pill as much as, a feminist man or feminists, whoever, liberal progressives, is not new. If you go on this subreddit, you will see that these red pillars back in the day called out Tradcons and understood that Tradcons were not here to help men. And even prior to that, it's just like, here's another post just from Rollo, just to show he understands this too, because he's one of the original red pillars. So here's just the first paragraph of this. Tradcon pundits, who we know are hosted by whatever podcast regularly, Tradcon pundits don't care about improving men's condition. They only care about male improvement insofar that it affects the needs of women. Their goal is to find a way to seem traditional without offending our feminist and chivalrous sensibilities. Okay, so, that's Rollo coming out and saying it. And then here is another red pill, OG. Here's Whisper. And Whisper had a lot of good threads back in the day about the Tradcons. And this one's titled The Great Tradcon, How Not to Get Conned. And that's 6 years ago. So that's before all this stuff went big on YouTube. Here's 10 years ago, the redefinition of marriage. And he specifically talks about the religious right, specifically about Christians, specifically about their failure to preserve men as an authority figure and their contribution to ruining marriage, So just to share a little bit of this one so the video is not too long. By this time, the only men who don't realize that marriage has mutated into something ugly are the truly stupid or the delusionally hopeful. Since we are not Captain Save-A-Bro either, we're not interested in preaching on street corners trying to save idiots from themselves. But there is a segment of the more clueful who are still making a serious mistake. They agree that marriage 2.0 is a trap, but they want marriage 1.0 back. I don't know if it's too many Jordan Peterson videos or just a yearning for unicorns that they know they won't find, but still believe once existed. But these guys want the 1950s back, despite having not been alive then and only having ever read about that era through its own propaganda, or that of its fat purple-haired detractors. There's a temptation to think that if only we could defeat the evil feminism that ruined everything, we could roll the clock back to an era where everything was easy. You can pluck a unicorn off the unicorn tree and find happiness, at least sexual happiness, without having to think, struggle, build value, or reinvent yourself. Well, no. Oh, here goes Whisper again, having a go at the Tradcons yet again. And I'm only reading this to you just to show that this current red pill Tradcon schism isn't new. It's not something that red pillars haven't realized before. It's just more mainstream now. What did they ever do to him? What the hell is his problem with the whole business anyway? It's time we answered that question once and for all. There's two simple reasons. You can't bring marriage 1.0 back. Neither you nor the secular Tradcons nor the Jesus freaks nor all of you together can resurrect this dead institution. Oh, you could defeat feminism. Feminism isn't scary. Hell, all you have to do for that is wait and watch feminism defeat itself. But feminism didn't kill marriage 1.0 in the first place. The information economy did. Number two, marriage 1.0 sucked for men anyway. Now, we can talk about how and why it sucked, and we will in a minute, but we don't need to know how it sucked to know that it sucked. All we need to know is that men agreed to destroy it for the mostly false promise of a little hairy free love snatch. Men saw it. It was available to them. They were intimately aware of what it offered. They watched their parents do it, and they chose column B. They didn't want it. End of debate. But we can talk about why they made this choice and why, for the same reasons, most modern tradcons are offering you a shit sandwich on really good bread. Now, I mean, red pillars know this. Red pillars know that the tradcon, I guess, offer is just, it's blue pill, right? And the tradcons have lost this game pretty badly, and they're trying to currently reinvent themselves and represent themselves to a male audience through the manosphere, which they have conveniently hijacked whatever podcasts to do. But if you've been in the red pill space long enough, you know that the tradcon promise is just, an illusion, basically. Number one, tradcon women are not submissive to you. They are submissive to the rules. And this is what I harp on about, especially about family law. Now, during the era of marriage 0.1, this wasn't really a significant difference because the rule was do what your husband tells you. And if one of your wives was disobedient, you just went and cut yourself a willow switch and fixed the problem. And there was much rejoicing. But marriage 1.0 wasn't like that. The rules didn't say obey your husband anymore. They said husband must do A, B, and C. Wife must do X, Y, and Z and must obey husband unless he neglects her or his order isn't godly and righteous. And you see this a lot in the current debates with the tradcon wives. And you saw that discussion with Pearl on Timcast, the Culture War show. And who exactly decides if he has been neglectful or his instructions are bad? Why? She does, of course. That tradcon girl ain't going to obey you, Mr. Alpha male badass person. Even if you do put a ring on it, she's going to obey some guy in a big I talk to Jesus hat. Who doesn't really care what your priorities are because his idea of a relationship is 5 minutes alone with that hot altar boy? I know some of these discussions could be a little crass, but that's what the red pill was back in the day. She's only going to obey you if and when she feels like it. And obedience when you feel like it isn't obedience at all. It's BDSM flavor doing whatever the F you want. And what consequences can you impose if she does shit you don't like? Funny you should ask. Number two, a captain who cannot fire a bad first mate without losing his crew and half his ship is no captain at all, right? And this just reminds me of current tradcon talking points that we see nowadays, right? It's just like, well, if you were a better husband, then she wouldn't leave you, right? Like whenever they hear complaints about family law and how family law is destroying families, it's just about, well, you should be a better captain. You should be a better captain, even though she can still leave if she wants to. Now, no-fault divorce didn't exist yet in marriage 1.0. So she could actually be punished for breaking Hat Guy's rules. She cheated on you, she got nothing. And so he's talking about at-fault divorce because Hat Guy told her not to cheat. But what about shit you want? Well, that marriage 0.1 willow switch is right out because Hat Guy told you not to. And just to be clear about terms, marriage 1.0 is the marriage laws we've had before no-fault divorce. Marriage 0.1 is like marriage a long time ago, like almost primitive marriage. Well, that marriage 0.1, that's primitive marriage, willow switch is right out because Hat Guy told you not to. So's Dread Game because that's infidelity, which Hat Guy doesn't like. And if you decide you need to fire your first mate because she won't obey the captain, then she gets all the crew and at least half the ship. Get the picture? You ain't the captain, bro. Hat Guy is the captain. The first mate is you. Anyways, I could go on with this thread, and maybe I'll do a separate video on that. But I'm just showing it because I just wanted to point out that red pillars way back in the day, even before all the YouTube folks got popular, were very aware of the tradcons and what the tradcons had to offer and why the tradcon deal is basically outdated and not going to work. And this is why you got the red pill in these corners of the internet anyway, right? So now what I see most of the other red pillars, like Fresh and Fit and, these folks getting demonetized, and we're left with whatever podcast who does nothing but host tradcons. For the most part, by and large, it's tradcon, advocating for the tradcon, shit sandwich that Whispers here is talking about 6 years ago, 10 years ago. And to me, that's the real conspiracy, is that Brian's show has been hijacked by tradcons, maybe not even purposely, maybe not even contractually, maybe almost unconsciously, because Brian himself isn't really advocating for anything. And since Brian's goals aren't clearly defined, and Brian's maybe personality is a little bit people pleaserish, the Tradcons have found him a convenient creator to be able to bend to their will so that they can inject the red pill space with this kind of reimagined version of the same Tradcon values that we all decided in the red pill space weren't working to begin with. Anyways, if you made it this far, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, leave a comment down below. Is the conspiracy real? Are we all just sitting here with our tinfoil hats on? I'm very much interested in your opinion, and I will see you on the next one. I do stream typically Saturday, 7 p.m. Pacific time, and I hope to see you guys there.